Hi everybody, I'm Tony E at Show IP Interface Brief, and today is my review of the INE lab I did on Saturday, which was incredible, guys. Absolutely incredible. Man, I'm feeling good. Whew, wow. On Saturday, we did for anyone who was out there with me, I did a 10-hour lab. And I got beat up pretty bad. I didn't finish the lab, and I got a number of things wrong. And I got rather emotional. I started getting frustrated. Not emotional like crying, but I started getting frustrated. My anger was starting to take over that, here I was sort of behind the clock. I was 10 hours into a lab. I was nowhere near the finish line, and I got to a point where I just couldn't go any further. There was just too many things that were messed up. And I can see how I got myself into that position now that some time has passed. And I can see how people can sometimes find themselves in that position in the lab. And that's just a matter of getting started, moving forward, and not solving one of the initial challenges early on, which leads to residual problems that ultimately can lead to you not finishing the lab or not scoring enough points to pass. And that's what happened to me. So I went ahead and on Saturday night, I brought up the answer key and I brought up all my configs and did all the show commands that was in the answer key. And what I found was the stuff that I completed, for the most part, I got right. And for any of the things that I left notes on were like I wasn't sure about something or I wasn't clear on what they were asking me, exactly what I thought, what I suspected at that time was exactly the thing that was pointed out in the answer key, which means I was a little bit right about that. So that's good. This is a growing process. Taking these sort of labs, these sort of exams, and this sort of testing style is a process, right? In fact, one of the tips that I heard someone give, maybe I read it somewhere, was as you're preparing for the CCIE lab, don't just sit around and read tech manuals and configuration guides and technology theory and stuff like that. Instead, also, in your free time, read lab tasks. And one of the reasons is that will get you tuned in to the type of language that's used in labs, to the type of questions that they ask you in order to meet some of the requirements. And so this being the third lab that I've done, I'm starting to get used to some of the language on how they write some of the requirements. Now, I know this is an INE product and not the Cisco CCIE lab, so the language is going to be a little different. But I suspect and I hope that the INE materials are preparing us for some of that tricky language. And not tricky, so to speak, but understanding what they mean. And so, one of the things that I hope that doing all of these labs prepares me for is I want to be able to take the CCIE lab exam and give it a fair shot. And I don't just mean like a fair shot like I'm going to try my hardest and see how good I do. I mean, I really want to work to be the absolute best so I can pass it on the first try. Now, maybe that's very, very high hopes, and maybe I'm miles away from that destination. But I look at it like this. I try to use an analogy like any other profession out there, right? Like if you want to be the best furniture maker, say you're a carpenter and a woodworker, and you want to be the best furniture maker, and you want to be able to make chairs the absolute best. Do you think you just make one chair and then you make your best chair, just second one? Do you think you make your best chair on your first try? No. You make chair after chair after chair after chair after chair after chair after chair. You put the time in and you make them and you make them and you make them. And you don't just make the same chair, but the same design with the same kind of legs and the same kind of back and the same kind of seat and the same kind of armrest and the same kind of everything. No, you use different woods. You use green wood, you use hardwood, you use dark wood. You do chairs without arms, chairs with arms, chairs with solid backs, chairs with slats, chairs with rails, chairs. You try to give yourself a little bit of everything. Same thing can be said if you're like in a construction profession. You want to be a tile setter. You want to be the best damn tile setter there is. You don't just start setting tiles and think that you're the best because you did one room. Absolutely not. That's not how professionals achieve. You put down a couple of tiles. Anyone can put down a couple of tiles. But can you put down tiles over concrete? Can you put down tiles over tile? Can you put down tiles over wood? Can you put tiles on the wall? Can you put tiles on the ceiling? Can you use round tiles, glass tiles, rock tiles? That's exactly what I'm trying to do with these labs. I'm trying to be able to evaluate myself and put myself through the paces of doing labs using all of these technologies in all these different ways. And that's why I try to take these labs to expose what my weakness is, to see what I'm not good at. Just like someone who tries to put tile on a wall, and then you find out that tile's going to crack and it's going to fall off the wall a month later. It's because you didn't put it on right. I'm trying to go through those learning lessons now, and that's what this 100 days of labbing is about. So I take these foundation labs, and then the tasks that I get wrong, or the things that I was questioning, is exactly what I'm going to target throughout the week. So let's go ahead and review how I did on the foundation lab. If anyone wants to follow along, you can. If you have access to the INE workbook online, this is the foundation lab number 3. It was actually a really awesome lab. I liked the topology. It was very routing heavy, not a lot of switching, and I really enjoyed it. Although I got very frustrated and I wasn't successful, I enjoyed it. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do it again. I'm not going to let this beat me and move on and let this just be a fight that I lost. I'm going to beat this lab. I'm going to do it again. I don't know if I'll do it live on stream. I might just take care of it one evening. But after reading through the answer key, and maybe some people are thinking to themselves, well, like, of course you can do it. You read through the answer key. You know exactly what's going to be on it. That's true, and that's also not true. I only followed the answer key up into the sections that I completed. So there's still almost 2 whole pages of tasks that I didn't complete. And secondly, just because I read the answer key, it doesn't mean I'm actually going to get it right the second time, right? I'm still the one in the driver's seat. So I have to do the actions. Just because you read it doesn't mean you can do the actions. So I'm going to give this lab another shot. I'm going to do it again. I was really feeling down on myself Saturday for not completing the lab and not being successful. I didn't think I was going to do it again, and I was thinking, where do I go from here? What do I do next? Now I'm beat down. Where do I go from here? And it just took me a minute. It took me till the end of Saturday after I reviewed the answers that I thought, you know what? The things that I got wrong were not that bad. I can do better. I can take the time to learn, and I can do better. So I'm going to study a couple of topics, then I'm going to circle back around, and I'm going to kill this lab. Okay. Everyone knows, if anyone watched the stream, the very first section is troubleshooting, and it just says faults. There is one fault with the initial configurations that needs to be resolved. So in the previous lab, I think it was a misplaced IP address, or it was a VLAN or subinterface that wasn't configured right. So I went ahead and assumed, and a lot of these problems that I had throughout my exam on Saturday is because I assumed. I assumed that this was going to be an inconfigured IP address or subinterface. And my preliminary inspection of the topology, which took me about 30 minutes to investigate all the routers and the IP addresses, did not turn up any faults. I could not figure out where the fault was. I had not considered things like maybe they have an access list on an interface that's blocking everything. Maybe that's the fault. Because I'm going in with the mindset that any configs that are on the devices prior to you beginning need to be there, and that you're only allowed to modify them. That was kind of the advice given to me when I was at Cisco Live in Orlando 2018. I took a CCNI Techtorial, which was sort of a walkthrough of the CCIE lab for both troubleshooting, diagnostics, and then the configuration elements and some best practices, and it was good. It gave me a lot of good insight. And what I gathered from that was if there's a piece of config that's in there, like an access list that's denying everything, typically you do not pull off the access list. Typically what you do is you add entries above the deny any to permit the traffic that you need to complete the task. So as soon as I opened the answer key and started troubleshooting 1.1, the faults, I saw exactly what I missed, and I understood exactly why my layer 2 was acting the way it was, and I understood exactly why I could not ping anything into my switch environment. I understood it immediately. This is a spoiler alert if anyone wants to skip this section. It was a damn VACL. It was a VLAN access list. It was dropping all frames that came into a switch. All of them. I didn't catch it. I didn't even check for the VACL. I didn't even look for it. And so that burned me up pretty bad. that prevented a lot of configuration. That prevented a lot of things for me that I couldn't complete. So, so once I saw that, I knew that I gave myself a question mark for that one because I just couldn't find the fault. And you know what? I deserve an absolute 0 for that. I get a 0 because I earned it. I didn't think that that was something that I should check. I didn't know that I should check that. And now that I've been burned by that, I won't let it happen again. Okay? And again, that's why I put myself through the paces. Just like the guy who tries to put tile on the wall that falls off a month later. Okay? When that falls off a month later, you have to go back and fix that. You don't make the same mistake. Okay? I'm not going to make the same mistake next time. Section 2 was ether channel. No. Section after that was trunking. I got everything right on trunking. No big deal. I got points for that. Although this isn't really a points graded thing, I gave myself the imagined points. Ether channel. I did configure it. There was only 2 things that I had highlighted, so I gave myself 0 points. And it says use 802.3 AD as the protocol for port channel 23. I was not sure what was the protocol standard. Was it LACP or PAGP? I wasn't sure. I had made a note that I think LACP is it, and LACP was correct. So my assumption was correct. I went ahead and configured it correctly, but I was taking a guess. And because I took a guess, I gave myself 0. The second was configure ether channel load balancing. Load balancing algorithm on switch 2 and switch 3 to take the destination IP address into account. I didn't know that off the top of my head. I knew it was something very simple, and I had just missed it. And so I just highlighted that. I gave myself 0 points because I want to make sure that I know all of the load balancing algorithms, exactly how to apply them and how to verify them. That's what doing these labs is about. So I gave myself 0 points, and that'll be something I work on throughout the week. I have a little note sheet of a couple of things to work on. Load balancing across ether channels is one of them. VTP. I gave myself 0 points for this section. There were 4 bullet points on this. I highlighted 2 items. Ensure a password could not be recovered by looking at the VLAN.dat file. I wasn't sure, so I derived that it says here VTP v3. So I know VTP v3, you can put in a hidden password or a secret password, and I wasn't sure which one cannot be recovered in the VLAN.dat database. It was a password with the hidden statement. So I had suspected that, and that's what I did configure. So I did technically get it right. However, because I made a guess, I wanted to take, if I made a guess on something, I'm marking it as incorrect because guesses don't count in the lab. That's not how I want to walk into the lab. I don't want to get something right by guessing. I want to get something right because I know it. Also, requiring anyone to enter a password to make changes was a little confusing. It says, after adding VLANs on v4, configure the network so that none of the switches in the VTP domain can make changes to the VLAN database without entering the VTP password first. So here's why it was confusing for me. Any of the switches, when you try to make a password change, it says only the primary server can do this. Okay. So at the primary server, in order for me to make a change, I could just go VLAN 1234, enter, and that increases the revision number, makes a change in the VLAN.dat database, and the change was accepted. So I wasn't sure, how do I make it so I have to enter a password every time? And here's the tricky wording on that one that kind of got me. It's not that you have to enter a password to make a change to the VLAN database. It's that you have to enter a password to become the primary server of the VTP3 domain. That's where you enter the password. So in the answer key, spoiler alert here, the answer key wants you to make your changes, create your VLANs on the primary server. Those VLAN changes propagate throughout the network, and then you make that primary server a client again. And so where do you enter the password? Well, the next time you try to make that switch, the VTP primary server, you have to enter a password to make it the primary. And that's what they're talking about. That was the requirement. So that was a misunderstanding on my part. I didn't know what they were talking about. I had tried a couple of things that I thought were right, but there was no way that you had to enter a password for making a change on the VLAN.dat database or from the VLAN database. So I gave myself 0 for that. So really, I mean, I didn't complete this lab, so that means I failed it. But also, if we're just keeping track of scores, I failed out of 4 sections so far, 3 of them. And again, guys, these aren't hard labs. They're foundation labs. These aren't hard. It can become difficult, and some of the difficulties are making themselves apparent here because it's layers, because they're layering simple things, right? It's not just one simple thing and then move on to another topic. It's a simple thing on top of another simple thing on top of another simple thing. And so if you're not clear, if you're guessing on one of those, it can throw the whole thing off and you get 0 points. Okay, the next one. I have a notepad file here in front of me that I'm making some notes on. When using the command show VTP password, VTP v1 and v2 will show the plain text password, but VTP v3 will show a hashed password if you use the hidden command. And that's just kind of one way to verify. So if they just said verify VTP version by showing the VTP password only, that's the only command you can run. If you see a clear text password, it's version 1 or version 2. If you see a hash password, it's version 3. Next section was spanning tree. One of the confusing things for me, and it was just because I just didn't commit it to memory, it's just confusing the protocols, remembering the protocol identifiers. Configure 802.1W between switch 1, switch 2, switch 3, and switch 4. 802.1W, how many of you out there know what that is off the top of your head? Some of you who study the topic are going to just say, gosh, Tony, that's easy. You're dumb. You know what that is. But you know what? After reading a page and a page of requirements and all the other protocols in my head, I got confused on which was 802.1W. Okay, so I made myself a little chart here. 802.1W is rapid spanning tree. 802.1S is multiple spanning tree. 802.1D is regular spanning tree. I'm looking over at the Discord server I have over to my right, and it looks like Land Tamer's just throwing out wild guesses here. That's okay, buddy. Put it on the drill sheet. So that was the only confusing thing, was I wasn't sure which protocol, and I absolutely want to be able to get that down to muscle memory, even though I know it's not a muscle like in my fingers, it's a muscle in my brain. I want to be able to get that because I'm sure I'll get a question like that, like configure spanning tree protocol 802.1W. I'm going to get that on the lab, or whatever, 802.1S. All right, and you have to know what protocol that is and how to configure it and sort of what the theory is behind it. So this, I think I actually got correct. Even though I guessed on the protocol, I thought it was rapid spanning tree, so I configured rapid spanning tree. I did get that right, so I would get points for that. I got all of the bullet points right. They were all correct. The second part was spanning tree part 2, different section. One of the elements, I completely did not understand what they were asking me. Oh, and I missed one small, let's see. I missed one small configurable element in the next section of spanning tree, which was, where's my error disable? Hang on, where is it? In the event the BPDU is received on these ports, switch 1, switch 2, switch 3, and switch 4 should re-enable the disabled ports every 30 seconds. Okay, so I was like, okay, this is, let's see what he got. Yep. Yeah, if anyone wants to join the Discord server, we got a lot of good guys and gals in there, a lot of good networking and security minds all melding together, and Land Tamer's over there chatting with us now in the channel. So great to have you. There's a link in the description below if anyone wants to join, if anyone's catching this live. Okay, so I immediately knew that was error recovery, right? So I knew that was error disable recovery. I call it error recovery. So I went ahead and did error disable recovery interval 30. And I was like, oh, that'll take care of it, right? That'll recover it every 30 seconds. Wrong. Because I didn't enable the recovery cause. Just because I set the timer doesn't mean I enabled it for a reason. So I missed, there were two commands to do that. Error, disable, recovery, cause, BPDU guard, because it wanted me to turn on BPDU guard. It wanted that to be the reason to shut down the port. Then it wanted me to make it so it recovers every 30 seconds. So I missed that, which was really tricky. I think one of the other things here was there was another thing here in the answer key, and maybe I didn't make a note of it because I can't recall, but I remember seeing it on Saturday and thinking like, wow, I had no idea. Absolutely no idea. It was some of the ports needed to be configured as half duplex. And that was because if they're half duplex, rapid spanning tree treats them as a shared link type. But if they're full duplex, rapid spanning tree treats them as a point-to-point link type. And it's so it wanted you to disable traffic using a particular link and wanted you to go around the long way around the switch block. And the way that it did that was to shut down the direct links so rapid spanning tree wouldn't use those links. Maybe I'm explaining it wrong. I'm trying to remember exactly what it was from memory on Saturday. That was something that just kind of blew my mind. I'm like, holy crap. Like going back to what are some of the default actions and reactions when you do half duplex versus full duplex. Like, I don't think anywhere in production in my career have I ever needed to configure something as half duplex. Just hasn't happened. I have found ports in half duplex with a lot of errors on them and their speeds reduced. So we go ahead and turn them up. So that's just, again, this is coming back to foundations. You got to master the foundations before you can build on top. And so keeping that in mind, I really have to master and understand much more deeply what are the effects of a switch in the switching protocols, expanding tree, and everything else when you configure half or full duplex on the link. So I got 0 points for that because I couldn't answer some of the questions, or I was guessing on some of them. The next section was Ether channel. That was all good, guys. So let's skip right over that. 3 easy points, easy points. Layer 3 port channel, no problem. Layer 2 security. It's the requirement there was if there are more than 50 total MAC addresses detected on the port, switch 1 will drop the offended traffic and generate a syslog message instead of shutting down the port. The non-offending traffic should not be affected. So when you're doing port security, there are 3 violation types. There's protect, restrict, and shut down. Typically, people do shut down if you're trying to meet any sort of security guidelines. Typically, it's shut down, right? If a new MAC address is learned on a port, if you had sticky MAC on there, go ahead and just shut it down and send a log message. Excuse me. But the other ones become unclear to me. One of them is to drop the offending traffic, and the other is to like drop it and send a log message. Or silently drop. One just drops it, and the other drops and sends a log message. And so I just have a little chart right here that I'm going to review. I'm going to review that. I need to know which ones restrict, protect, and shut down. Which one sends a log message and which one doesn't. And also, when configuring port security, it had me try to meet a bunch of requirements here, bullet points. And so you do, switch port, port security, MAC address or VLAN maximum, and you set the maximum and the violation type, and you set all these things and you configure all of them, and then you go into the next task because you're basically, in my mind, I'm just checking off boxes. Okay, I've done that requirement, done that requirement, done that requirement, done that requirement, and moved on. And I forgot one very crucial command in switch port security, and you want to know what that is? I forgot the switch port security command, which actually turns on port security. Right? The rest of the commands don't actually turn it on. They define the actions and reactions of port security. But to actually turn it on, you just need switch port security. That turns it on. Okay? All I was doing was configuring the actions and reactions and crossing stuff off my mental checklist, and I forgot to actually turn it on. And you know what the grading script on the CCIE lab is going to do? It's going to do show port security and the interface, or show port security interface and the VLAN, and it's going to see not enabled. It's going to see port security disabled. And I'm going to get a 0 for the entire section. No matter how much time I waste configuring all of the different actions and reactions, if you don't turn it on, it doesn't count. Next section is DMVPN. Yeah, Landtamer, it's burned me up. DMVPN, what do you guys think? Did I pass or fail? It is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 bullet points for the DMVPN section. I'm strong in DMVPN. Damn right I am. I got it all right. I got 100% right. That DMVPN was nothing. And you know why? I kind of said this during stream. And the first 2 pages, I've already gone through 2 pages of this review. I have just a couple of more pages of tasks that to review here. When I finally hit the DMVPN section, I said, finally, something I can do. And that's because I worked DMVPN. I worked it and worked it and worked it until it became muscle memory, until I understood the theory, the configuration, and the validation. I think that's the key to solving all of these problems here. Is the theory, configuration, and validation. Now, I've been through the ringer with DMVPN. I'm trying to make a little notepad over here. I've been through the ringer with DMVPN. I've worked it and worked it and worked it. Okay? And it paid off. And I got this, and it was no problem. The next section was RIP v2. And this one is 6 bullet points. And most people consider RIP like, oh, RIP, that's nothing. But you know what? The simple protocols can give you the most trouble because in your mind, you think they're so simple, you don't have to spend time studying them. And actually, I got my ass handed to me in Narbik's boot camp with RIP. He started pulling out some crazy labs. Narbik really does a great job in his labs and his content doing things differently than I&E and different from what I've seen in the Cisco 360 courseware. And he does a good job of like showing you things that you didn't know were possible with a protocol, or that you 100% should never do in production, but in theory, they actually work. And he makes that a requirement for some of his labs. I got my ass handed to me with RIP. So I made sure not to ever make that assumption again that any protocol is too easy not to be worth my time to study. Okay, so I actually studied RIP. And it paid off. I got all 6 bullet points absolutely correct. One configuration note. On the answer key, they wanted you to use an offset list to make a prefix unreachable. I did not use an offset list. Instead, I used administrative distance. So I took that single prefix from that single router and applied an administrative distance to it of 255 so it won't show up in the routing table. I'm keeping my points for that one. Although the answer key said an offset list, and I forget if this was the thing that said instead of an offset list, modifying the administrative distance. There was one of the things in the answer key that said you could have done it this way or this way, but in the answer key we'll show you this way. So I don't know if that was it or not, but I'm keeping my points for that because it was completely valid. It worked, and it was no trouble. So I got all of those points right. The RIP v2 section continued, which was sort of like a part 2, is a separate section. I gave myself a 0 for that. It's a single bullet point, new section. RIP v2 continues. Say configure RIP v2 to mark routes as inaccessible 750 milliseconds after detecting a link failure between routers 1 and 9. I assumed that that meant BFD, that it wasn't a timer manipulation, but I actually didn't recall how to configure BFD. So that is on my list to do this week. Is to work that BFD muscle. And the reason is BFD came up a couple of times in this lab. And for every time that it came up, I failed. So I gave myself a 0 for that. I looked at the answer key, and the answer key actually does a really good job. If you guys haven't started the foundation labs, you haven't been through the INE material, they don't just give you the show output. They show you how to do the verification. They show you the configs. And a lot of times there'll be a large explanation for exactly how something works, why it works, and the theory behind it. And I'm really grateful for that because I take the time to read it. That's valuable information that I can be soaking up. The next section was OSPF. It's sort of your basic OSPF. So they really layer OSPF. That's what I found throughout these INE labs. There are 3 OSPF sections. The first one I got 100% right. I have no comments about that. It was right on. The second section, which was 5 more bullet points, I also got right on. And I also made a note that says I learned a new command. I learned it from the answer key of INE for this section, which was 4.4, section 4.4 OSPF. And that was in their answer key. They wanted to do show IP OSPF border routers. Now, once I saw that, I thought, wow, this is a new command. That's great. So I went on the router. I went ahead and did it and verified. And I was like, that's great. And then I remembered, I was like, you know what? I think that was the very first command that I saw in Nick Russo's Troubleshooting OSPF at Cisco Live. I think he broke that command out. And he was like, it was just his go-to for to find out where your ABRs are all throughout the network. And it's great. And you know what? I've been hammering out OSPF off and on through the past couple of weeks, and I haven't used that command once. So I'm going to go ahead and commit that to memory, make sure I use that command. I'm going to make a note of it here somewhere. Very handy and has a little bit of different output to it. The next section was OSPF v3 for IPv4. I got the configurations correct, and the things that I missed were the things that I was thinking. So one of the bullet points says configure sub-second failover for OSPF v3 domain. I assumed that that was BFD, but I wasn't sure, so I gave myself a 0. I scored myself a 0 because I didn't complete that bullet. I actually didn't know what it meant. In a previous OSPF lab, it was timer manipulation, and I happened to get that right. This time it was BFD. They actually wanted BFD, and the way you configure BFD for OSPF is a little different than the way you do it for RIP. So I'm definitely going back to study BFD. I'm going back to foundations for that. I need to start from the ground up because I need a strong foundation that I can build on. So I need to build on a strong BFD foundation. Also, the OSPF LSAs. They use different LSA numbers. And like, why? You know, you've heard my gripes of OSPF. In the OSPF routing protocol, there have been like 200 new terms just invented out of thin air. Why? Well, you know, can't we just use the same terms that we use to describe other routing protocols? No, OSPF has to be different. They have to be their own. I don't know why. It's so frustrating. It makes it so difficult to learn. And then to come out with a new OSPF and just go, you know what? Here's a whole new set of terms. Type 9 LSA. Okay. Anyone know what Type 9 LSA is? Waiting for the feed on Discord over here. So that wraps up my OSPF v3. I gave myself a 0. Tamer says, yes, OSPF v3 inter-area routes. That's right, inter-area prefix LSA to advertise stub networks into an area instead of packing them inside of the Type 1 router LSAs, which is what OSPF v2 does with their router LSAs, LSA Type 1s. The next section was EIGRP. Although I got most of the bullet points, I missed one crucial piece, and I gave myself a 0 for it. I got everything, but the wording of a requirement made me think otherwise. It wants you to use picoseconds instead of microseconds. So it wanted you to configure EIGRP so that, let's see what it say here. The EIGRP delay value should be measured in picoseconds instead of microseconds. Okay? I'm thinking there's got to be a config. There has to be an element. There has to be a way to change how we configure or what delay uses for its measurement, pico or micro. And I was just thumbing through it and I couldn't find it. But the rest of the configs here, the rest of the tasks led me to believe and led me to configure EIGRP in named mode. So I highlighted that and gave myself a 0. Even though I got all of these correct, I was guessing on some of them because I didn't know what they were asking me, and it was that pico versus microseconds. And so the fact is, when you configure EIGRP named mode, it uses the wide metrics by default, which uses the picosecond value of delay, not microsecond. So it was using it by default. So technically, I actually got it right. But because I didn't know it, I gave myself a 0. The next section was redistribution. It was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different redistribution elements. From this protocol to this protocol and this router. And then again, from this protocol to this protocol and another router. And another router and another router and another router and another router. It was, one of them was OSPF into OSPF into OSPF. It was just absolutely nuts. So my notes on this subject are, after reading the key, I'm glad to know that my solution for modifying the administrative distance of 5 and 8 was valid according to the answer key. This was the thing I was just mentioning just a little while ago. I read the answer key, and the answer key said there were 2 ways to accomplish this. You could modify the metric value or the origin type, or not origin type, I forgot what it was, or you could modify the administrative distance. And then the key went on to say, we're going to show you how to do it this way. And they didn't go over how to do the administrative distance. I did the administrative distance on my own. That was just how my brain worked and how I wanted to solve that problem. And so actually I solved it the correct way for the key. And I thought that was really great. It really started to validate some of the logical thinking that I needed throughout this lab experience. There was like the EIGRP was really good, had a lot of critical thinking in there of how to split up routes and stuff. And in fact, the section on EIGRP, the exact way that INE explained it in the key is exactly the way I explained it on stream, which was they actually didn't tell you how to configure anything. They just said router 5, 7, and 8, I think it was 5, 7, and 8, should see each other's routes, but 5 and 8 should not form an adjacency. That's all it said. So you really had to sort of work through, what are they trying to say, and how do I accomplish that? And exactly the stuff that I had talked about on stream was exactly how they explained it. So I felt really good about that. I felt validated about that. And that's exactly what going through these labs is doing. It's helping to validate the things that I have a strong foundation on, and it's uncovering those things that I don't and I need to work on. So redistribution, I have to give myself a 0 because the very last bullet point was ensure full reachability between loopbacks and connected networks of routers in the OSPv3 and EIG, actually in all the domains. Actually, I'm wondering, wait a second. This one, sorry, I wrote a 0 on my sheet, but my notes here on screen that I made after going through the answer key are different. So they actually say after this task, you should be able to run this TCL script, which pings all the interfaces. And so I went ahead and threw that on the same router that they did in the answer key, and I was able to ping all those interfaces. So it says the TLC script from the workbook checked out good. So I should get credit for the redistribution. There actually wasn't a lot of like filtering or tagging between protocols. It was just everything from this protocol into this protocol and everything from this protocol into this protocol, but it was a lot. So moving on. So I guess I'm going to give myself credit for that. Although it's an overall fail for the exam, that section was okay. So which means I don't need to spend a lot of time going through that and reviewing it, putting extra time on it. All right, BGP. IBGP, I got all the points. I got all of the bullet points. There was 5 bullet points. It was no big deal. I did go like a very stupidly roundabout way of figuring out the damn dot notation, the 32-bit AS, what am I trying to say? 32-bit autonomous system, not the decimal notation, the AS notation, the AS dot notation. I wasn't in the right headspace, I guess. But anyhow, it took longer than I wanted. I remember wasting a lot of time on that section, but I got all the points. And then this, one of the things in that IBGP, it shows you a bunch of show output in the task. And it says your show output or your commands should look like this. And it didn't tell you how to do this in the previous tasks. So there are some things here you need to look out for. And I'm not going to point them out because obviously you can't see the answer key here. I want you guys all to do the workbook yourselves. But there were a couple of things here, and I was able to get that. And I felt really good because, again, that was just another validated moment where I was able to see like, oh, okay, this is what they're doing here. This is what they're doing here. And I was able to go back, modify my configs to make things work to achieve the same view. And I confidently did so. So I felt really good about that. The eBGP section, I got all those points. It was 5 bullet points, 5 tasks. No problem. There wasn't anything really complicated here. The next was label exchange, MPLS label exchange. So I shouldn't get any points for this because according to the answer key, I was way wrong. Although I felt like I did achieve the tasks if I was up against an automated grading script, it would probably say that I got it wrong. So I just need to make sure I do things more clearly, probably the way that they're asking. And again, I know this is INE material, this isn't Cisco material, and so the grading is going to be a little different. The answers are going to be a little different, and the wording is going to be a little bit different. But I want to make sure I can meet these requirements because after I go through the INE material, there's other material that I'm going to go through. I have Cisco 360 material. I have some Narvik material. We can even start making up our own material. Hopefully, me and a group of guys or gals over in the Discord server, we can start building some large labs and requirements. The problem with that is while we're all studying for CCIE, it's hard to take a lot of time off to build labs for other people. I mean, sure, I can whip together a couple of routers and let anyone play around with it, but a full-scale lab this size with this kind of complexity and requirements takes a while to build out. So I don't think any of us really have the extra cycles to spin on that, sadly. But at least we're all here in community to help support each other. And then another one was, it said for the label exchange, use the fewest number of commands to set up label exchange between DMVP and routers. I put a question mark in my notes because I didn't know what that was. And what the answer key said was, OSPF and ISIS have the LDP auto configuration feature, which allows the network operator to enable LDP on all interfaces running in the routing process with a single command. This command takes an optional or argument that allows the operator to specify which OSPF area or ISIS level LDP should be enabled on. Other IGPs don't have this feature, so it is required to enable label processing on each interface by using the MPLS IP command. I did not know that OSPF, or ISIS for that matter, can distribute labels. That was completely new to me. I haven't been through that. I didn't complete the INE workbook, the Advanced Technologies workbook. I've gotten most of the way through it, and then I studied for the written exam, and then Cisco Live, and I took the written exam a couple of times, and then there was Cisco Live, and then I passed the written. So I went ahead and just started jumping on lab preparation. So this is one of those things that I'm sure was in an INE lab that I 100% missed. In fact, a lot of these things are part of the INE Advanced Technologies labs from their workbook that I keep, hawking for all of you and saying, go buy it, go buy it, go buy it. It's worth the money. A lot of the things I'm missing in here are just simple labs from the workbook that maybe I didn't get to. So that was a gap in my knowledge. The next thing was, and I'm almost done because I didn't complete more of the lab than this, the VRF provisioning. So here's where I actually reached my breaking point and my stopping point in the lab. There were 5 bullet points here. I got all 5 configurable elements. I configured them. Done. Then the last thing here is not a bullet point, but it says match the following output on router 3 and router 6. And it shows you some output, which is you pinging IPv4 and IPv6 address from router 3 and from router 6 outward to something else. And here's where I got burned. I knew I had everything configured properly, and I tried to ping outward, and I failed. It wouldn't ping. And so that led me down about an hour's worth. I don't know, actually know if it was an hour's worth. I'm probably just exaggerating, but what felt like an excruciating amount of time, a rabbit hole of troubleshooting. And it led me all the way back to my switching, which was the very first thing we did in the lab. And I couldn't ping from a router connected to a switch, connected to another switch with a VLAN interface on it. I couldn't ping from the router through the layer 2 to the second switch, which had a VLAN interface. So I went ahead and configured the next switch, the closer one. So it's just a router directly connected to a switch with an IP address on that VLAN that should have pinged. And I couldn't ping across. And they were directly connected. They were directly connected and I couldn't ping. And I troubleshot and troubleshot and troubleshot and troubleshot and troubleshot. I even think I did something crazy. Like I took all the config off the switch, rebooted it, and put all the config back on. Like that was going to solve anything. Like what an incredible waste of time that was. That was an exercise in stupidity is what that was. I was not focusing on the right thing. And you know what the problem was? Let me read you what was the problem on our very, very first task. Jack, mentors, if you're listening, cover your ears. The very, very first thing was troubleshooting. And what was the very, very, very first thing? It was a VACL. And what does a VACL do? Blocks all incoming frames. At least this one was set to block all incoming frames. It blocked all of my STP frames, which is why in the switching section, I couldn't even get spanning tree working properly. In fact, I don't think I gave myself points for that. I gave myself zeros for spanning tree. Actually, I gave myself credit for that, for turning that on, but I shouldn't have. It blocked spanning tree because I remember troubleshooting. I had 2 switches. One of them was the root switch because I configured his priority of 0. I forced him into root. No other switch can be 0. I guess if you had an older MAC address, you could. And the other switch had a priority of like 32,000 something. And he thought he was the root. And they're directly connected. And there was no way that I could get all of the switches to recognize one single root switch. And the problem was the damn VACLs. It was the very first problem. It caused me to fail so many things. And that's just what I mean. I was so frustrated at the lab because I had put in a hard day's work. I had put in 10 hours of live stream lab. And I wasn't successful. And I was embarrassed, and I was frustrated, and I was angry. And I was nowhere near completing the lab. So it was a lesson in realizing how compounding problems can be. Because I didn't get the VACLs, it screwed up my spanning tree. Because spanning tree wasn't right, it screwed up something else. And then ultimately, because of the physical topology of the lab, I actually couldn't ping any traffic that went in through the switching because of VACLs. So if there were any VLAN interfaces inside the switching, they could all ping each other, but I couldn't ping anything from the outside in because the switch that they're connected to is blocking everything. So those were some lessons learned, some big lessons learned. And how am I going to move forward from this? Easy. It's easy and apparent to me now. If you asked me on Saturday, I'd have told you I'm almost ready to give up. If I can't solve a foundation lab, then what can I do? But you know what? I was beat up. It was a long day and things like that, and I'm only human. But here it is. I've taken my day of rest on Sunday. I had Sunday pho day. I don't know about you guys, but I started eating pho. I know people call it pho. I call it pho. There's a little pho joint by my house. On Sundays, I go and eat pho. It is the best damn food. It's just become a pattern for me. For the last 3 Sundays, I go and have pho. That's what I do. Oh, man, it's delicious. Anyhow, how am I going to recover from this? I'm going to do this lab again. I'm not going to let this lab beat me. I'm going to beat this lab. Yes, I've read through the answer key. I'm not going to look at it again. I'm going to go through this lab, start it from scratch, okay? Use some of the things that I've learned, and also gives me an opportunity to validate the way that I configured some things, because so far I haven't redone any labs. So whether I got sections right or wrong, I was just kind of going through the paces. Now it gives me an opportunity to do the right things right again and correct the things that were wrong. And this time I want to be able to go all the way through the lab. Now, I'm not going to do it, I don't think, next Saturday for a live stream. I might not. I have to look at my family schedule. But I'm not going to take 10 hours to do it. I can guarantee that. All right. It's going to be a much shorter kill. So that's where I'm at, guys. So a couple of things that I'm going to be working on throughout this week, because when I retake this lab, I want to have these topics covered. BFD, big one for me. BFD. I think it's fairly simple. I think there's a lot to understand, but I think configuration-wise, it's fairly simple. There's not a lot of lines to it, right? It's not like DMVPN or big MPLS, multi-protocol BGP that has so many elements you got to configure. It's just a couple of lines. But I want to go back and make sure I understand the foundations. Another foundation thing that I think everyone should take the time to do, if you haven't thought about this, you need to think about it. How does the duplex setting affect all of the configurable elements on a switch? What does it do to the switch? Okay. Again, we're going to practice on, this is going to be my 3 keywords, guys. Theory, configuration, validation. Theory, configuration, validation. That's what I'm going with. All right, those couple of things. I'm also going to try and kill it with some show IP OSPF border routers command. All right, so that's my review. I hope all of you had an opportunity to follow along. Definitely get your hands on the I&E workbook. These labs are great. I'm having a lot of fun. It's not going to be the end-all, be-all. I don't really think any one person should just do one workbook, an I&E workbook, and then consider themselves ready. I'm not going to take that approach. After we burn through the I&E material, I'm on day 28 now, guys. I'm going for 100 days here. I got more material to cover. We're going to be doing Cisco 360. So when that comes around, I'll start posting that. That's down the road. Cisco 360 is going to be down the road a bit. We got a lot of I&E stuff to get through. I got some Narvik stuff to get through. Narvik's got a great workbook, a lot of labs. I've been through his boot camp. Boot camp was great, really great experience. A lot of great people in there. So there's a lot more to do beyond I&E. I&E we're getting started with. So I'm going to go back, do a good job on this lab, and enjoy my week. And I hope all of you enjoy your week, guys. Theory, configuration, validation. Okay? That's everything you need to know. Thanks, guys. I'll be studying for the rest of the week, and I hope you are too. See ya.